Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has been brought before Congress to testify about allegations of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. And during those hearings, this man said that he wasn't aware of members of the campaign having connections with the Russians or meeting with the Russians. This man was later forced to admit that he, in fact, met with the Russian ambassador. This man, it turns out that he was wrong when he said there were no connections between the Trump administration or the Trump campaign and the Russians. It turns out that George Papadopoulos had been in regular contact with the Russians and that Jeff Sessions was aware of this. Jeff Sessions actually participated in a meeting with George Papadopoulos and Donald Trump. And during that meeting, according to the allegations, George Papadopoulos boasted about his ties or connections with the Russians, and George Papadopoulos presented the idea of candidate Trump meeting with Vladimir Putin during the campaign. And Jeff Sessions, during that meeting, he shot down that idea and he said it was a bad idea. But somehow during the congressional hearings, somehow he failed to mention this. You know, when asked about these connections with the Russians, somehow this escaped his memory. Somehow he didn't mention this at all. And I just think that this is an example of perjury. This is an example of someone who has lied on a record. This is an example of somebody who is not fit to serve as U.S. Attorney General. How can you be the chief law enforcement official in the United States and you're violating the law by committing perjury? How can you be trusted to enforce the laws in this country when you can't even be forced to tell the truth to your colleagues? You work with these people in Congress. You were a senator. But yet you're going to lie to these people that you worked with. Tell them, an outright lie that you're not aware of connections between the Trump administration and these Russians. And this is not the first time. As I said before, this guy said that he wasn't aware of any contacts with these Russians. Turns out he actually met with a Russian ambassador. This whole situation stinks. And this guy, George Papadopoulos, he's been indicted and he pled guilty to providing false information to the FBI when they were conducting their investigation about this collusion. And then you have two other people who are indicted connected to this whole Russian collusion issue. And there are so many people in that Trump campaign and Trump administration that have direct ties with these Russians. You got that Michael Flynn guy and all these other long list of people with ties to this Russian government. And, when you look at what has happened in terms of the Russians leaking all this information from the DNC, when you look at the false ads, the fake news that the Russians created on social media, there is a case to be built about collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. When you look at how the Trump administration has dealt with NATO, how Trump has basically alienated some of the U.S. allies, there's an argument that can be made that that's a result of this collusion between the Trump administration and the Russians. So at this point, I think that Jeff Sessions needs to resign and he needs to be indicted for perjury, because you can't tell me that this man somehow forgot that conversation. A conversation where he told George Papadopoulos that that's not a good idea for Trump to meet with Vladimir Putin. So tell me what y'all think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.